Hey y'all, Lily here with Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this glittered beach tumbler. This is a pink glittered beach tumbler. I made a short of this on my TikTok, my Instagram, and everybody wanted to know how I created this in detail. So I thought I would give y'all a YouTube video. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. I'm starting with my 20-ounce skinny stainless steel tumbler I received from Maker Flow Crafts. I sand this tumbler down with a 100 grit sanding block. And after I finish sanding this tumbler down, I wipe down with 91% alcohol. I typically use like a 100 grit to a 180 grit sanding block, so whichever grit you have works. I am wiping this down with 91% alcohol to remove any of those excess oils that may have been placed on the tumbler or any of that sanding dust that may have been placed on the tumbler. I do this for every single tumbler before starting my design. This is the prepping process. Once my tumbler is prepped, I'm going to paint my tumbler with my pop of color cotton candy pink, was it? Cotton candy pink. And I add that with my Wet n Wild brush. This is a makeup brush. Again, all of these items will be linked. I'm doing my first coat on this tumbler just to paint it. So this is not being used as an adhesive. I am just painting this tumbler pink to have my nice pink base. If you do not have this color on hand, don't go out and buy it and waste the money if you already have another pink on hand that's a different brand, or you can always spray paint your tumbler. So I have gotten super lazy, so I don't like going outside as much, so that's why I am painting most of my tumblers, because it's just easier to paint it and let it dry, do some more crafts, and then come back and go on. So I'm applying my second coat. The reason why I'm applying 2 coats of this is because I have some lighter pinks that I am using for the glitter, and I don't want any of that stainless steel peeking through. So you'll see that it's pretty good coverage with the first coat, but that second coat really does allow that tumbler to have that nice coverage. I am just applying this paint as my color, okay? So like I said, I'm not using this as my adhesive. I'm going to add my glitters using the epoxy method. So I am using this paint only to add the color to my tumbler. Again, spray paint your tumbler if you have the spray paint. And if you have white paint or white spray paint, that will also work just as well. Once that paint was dried, I went in with my epoxy. I'm using my epoxy as my adhesive. So again, I'm using the epoxy method to add my glitters. I'm using about up to 5 milliliters of epoxy of this tumbler on this tumbler. The reason why you use so little epoxy for this tumbler is because you want this epoxy to act as your adhesive. So the way I like to explain this is if I were to take some spray adhesive and spray it on my tumbler and add the glitter to my tumbler, the glitter would stick. That little bit of mount, that little bit of layer of spray adhesive was enough for my glitter to stick. So that's why I want that small amount. You'll see that I add a heavy amount at first on this tumbler, and then I take my time with really wiping down my tumbler and removing any of that excess. Again, I use up to 5 milliliters of epoxy. I probably didn't even use that much. You don't want so much epoxy on your tumbler because then it will get absorbed by the glitter and then you won't have that shine. So you want a very thin amount, just enough for that glitter to stick, because this epoxy is very sticky and that glitter is going to stick just as easily as if you would pour a lot of epoxy on there. And now to go in with my glitter colors. All of my glitters are going to be from Glitter Heart Co, and I will have them all listed in my description below. I am first going in with the color Golden Rose, and I'm adding this to the bottom of the tumbler. I'm mainly focusing on the bottom of the tumbler and the bottom part of like the bottom rim of the tumbler. And then I'm just going to add some just like maybe like a couple inches up. And I'm not focusing on like it ombreing or cascading up the tumbler. I'm just focusing on a fully covered bottom, and you'll see that I put that glitter all over the bottom of the tumbler so it's nice and covered. and I just made sure that it was as straight as possible, and you could see that it's really not that straight. So I'm going in with my second color, it's Lacy, and I'm focusing on applying that glitter over the golden rose. So I just want it to overlap slightly, and that way you get that nice blend effect. This is a very light coralish almost color, so you can barely see it once the tumbler's finished. And then for my third color, I'm going in with What the Flock, and this color actually blends the most with the tumbler, so this was very easy to lay. Whenever I get more further up the tumbler and my colors get more thick, I start at the top part of where I want my glitter to end, and then I go down further where I placed that glitter color before. So you'll see the furthest away that I get from Lacy, I bring my cup further away from the tumbler. So we'll start with this next color, which is Cherry Blossom, and I'm starting at the most top part of where I want it to land, and I'm just basically, I have my cup like 6 inches away from my tumbler right now, and as I'm getting closer to What the Flock, I'm raising my hand just slightly. And the reason why I like to sometimes place my glitters inside my small medicine cups is because sometimes the glitter bottles are too full, and I know with my heavy hand I'm going to just dump all that glitter on there. So adding it in a small medicine cup, it allows me to have more control over the colors, and it's just easier for me. So the next color and the last color is Sundays. This is a nice pinky orangey color. This is perfect for sunsets. Go grab this color. I'm telling you, it's so much more beautiful in person. I love this color. So you'll see that I'm just placing this on the top of the tumbler, and as I'm getting closer to Cherry Blossom, I'm lifting my hand more, allowing that glitter to come out a little less and just not dumping it on there. These colors blend so perfectly, in my opinion, and it flows so well. And I just think it's easy for these colors to blend together. So once I finish laying all of these colors down, I go in and I kind of clean it up. My main focus is to just make these lines straight. I'm not too focused on the blend because I'm going to add some paint over this, so it's really not that big of a deal. So I did notice that the bottom didn't have that much coverage, so I took my tumbler off the turner and I just put my golden rose on the bottom just to make sure that I have a fully covered tumbler so it was nice and glittered. And once I have all my glitter on my tumbler, I'm going to turn my turner back on, let my turner spin for about 2 hours, and then turn my turner off and let my tumbler air dry or cure for another 2 hours. So let this dry or cure for about 4 to 5 hours, just enough to the point where you can add another layer of epoxy over. So this is a 20-ounce tumbler, so I am using 50 milliliters of epoxy for this part. I needed to separate 10 milliliters of epoxy for my paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to put 40 milliliters of epoxy all over this tumbler. And I didn't seal this, I just went right in because if the glitters like mix, these colors are just so pretty together, I wasn't going to mind it. So I put my 40 milliliters of epoxy all over my tumbler, my clear epoxy. If it feels like too much, that's okay. Keep applying that epoxy. And then we're going to add those waves and those colors on this step. So I added my epoxy to my tumbler, making sure it's nice and smooth. I add a nice thick layer, not too thick because this isn't going to be your final layer. And then we're going to add some paints into that 10 milliliters of epoxy that I set to the side. So now I'm going to grab some of my medicine cups. I am just placing them down one by one, and then I'm going to pour little bits of epoxy in each medicine cup. I pour like 2 milliliters of epoxy total. Like you really need a very small amount of epoxy because you're not going to use that much, and you don't want to use too much or your tumbler is going to be really bumpy. So I basically just separate all of that epoxy, and I still have some left over just in case. I'm going to take my white acrylic paint. This is all apple barrel paint and it does not matter the finish. It's just acrylic paint. I chose this paint because I knew everybody, or mostly everybody, has acrylic paint on hand. I add a little bit of paint into my cup and then I stir until I see one color and you don't see those stir marks. Now I'm going with Cameo pink and then I add a very tiny bit, and again I'm stirring until I don't see two colors and I see one solid color. Next color is pink Parfait, and I'm adding a little bit and you'll see the tiny bit that I'm adding. If you add too much acrylic paint, it's going to get really stringy. And then for the second color, or the last color, I'm using Jack-o'-lantern and Diva pink for that top like orangey color, because I didn't want to put pink on there and I didn't want to put orange, so I thought kind of mixing the two to make my own color, and that's exactly what I did. So I just mixed it until I got the right mixture, until it looked as close as my Sundae's glitter as possible. And then now I'm just going to take my popsicle stick and I'm just going to place those paints all around the tumbler, and it's going to look like lines on the tumbler at first. So trust the process, guys. Just add it to your tumbler until your little heart is happy. I know some people like more color than less glitter, and some people just like glitter and less paint. And this was probably like my 6th time doing this beach pink tumbler. So you'll see at the end and you'll see at the beginning that my other tumblers are all white. I found it a lot easier to just use the white, and I personally like the white better, but this is how I did mine in my TikTok with the different colors, so I wanted to keep it the way I did in my TikToks. So once I apply those paints on the tumbler, I'm taking my heat gun and I put that thing on high. I don't have any patience. So if that epoxy melts off the tumbler, it is what it is. So I'm adding my heat gun to my tumbler and you'll see that that paint is moving some, and that's what I want. So I love that cloudy look and everything like that. It just goes so well. And I personally don't like using acrylic paint for this step, but I use this because I know everybody, or mostly everybody, has it and it's most cost efficient. I like CC DIY color dispersion paints. They go inside of epoxy the same way. It's just the paints are just so much more pigmented. So whenever you add it to the tumbler, it really does pop. So I will add some of those paints down below. They are really pricey. That's the reason why I chose the apple barrel. The apple barrel's not bad, but that's why I chose my apple barrel instead of the dispersion paints to show y'all. Okay, back on track. So I let this spin on the cup turner for about 4 hours. I turn off my cup turner and then I let it air dry or air cure for another 20 hours. So I like a full 24-hour curing time before moving on to this step. I'm taking an X-Acto knife and I'm just cutting the edge or the rim of my tumbler just to remove any of that excess epoxy that may have cured on the tumbler. And then I'm going to take a 220 grit sanding block and I'm going to sand around the entire tumbler. I'm doing this very lightly, and the reason why I'm doing this is just to sand away any of those bubbles that may have been created on the tumbler, or any of that glitter that may have been peeking through that epoxy. I don't want to sand away that glitter, so I don't want to sand very hard. I want to do a very light sanding. And once I'm finished sanding around the tumbler, I'm going to take my 120 grit sanding block and I'm going to sand the rim, leaving the tiniest bit of stainless steel exposed so we can have a nice seal with that epoxy at the final epoxy coat. And every time after I sand, I always go in with my 91% alcohol to remove any of that excess oils or dust that may have been placed on my tumbler. Now, after I wipe this down with 91% alcohol, you can add your decal to this, but I wanted a smoother tumbler, so there were some spots where it wasn't as smooth as I wanted it. So I wanted to go in with another coat of epoxy. I used 12 milliliters of epoxy total for this coat. I just wanted a very thin amount of epoxy just to have a smooth surface, because I don't like laying my decals down with a like uneven surface, if that makes sense. I want a nice smooth surface. You see that I have a lot of epoxy in that tumbler, but I like to epoxy my tumblers all at once. So I am doing a lot of other epoxy tumblers on the side. So don't think that's 12 milliliters of epoxy, because there's probably a lot more in that cup. But like I said, I just did one coat just to make it smooth, just to really take my time with it, to have a nice, clean final product. If your tumbler is smooth and it's not like bumpy or anything, like from the glitter or anything like that, go ahead and sand your tumbler and apply your decal and just skip this step. And again, letting this tumbler spin on the cup turner, and then it is completely cured. I'm going in with my X-Acto knife again after every single time. I X-Acto knife my rim. I'm going to lightly sand it after. I believe I used the 180 grit sanding block. I wasn't too worried about sanding away the glitter on this part because I had that extra coat of epoxy. So if you do need to sand some areas, I always like to put another thin coat of epoxy, and that way you can really sand and put your elbow into it. So I sanded it with a 120 grit sanding block, and then I did my rim, I did around the tumbler, and then I always take that 91% alcohol and I wipe around the entire tumbler. And once I'm finished with this step, it is decal time. All of my files that I have on this tumbler are all from Cricut Design Space. I do pay like the $10 a month for the extra designs, and I just typed in like beach and seashells, and I found like really cute just easy weeding designs. So I do take that in consideration whenever I find my designs. I think like, is this gonna be hard to weed? Because if it is, I'm not doing it. So I have this nice like tan, almost coral color vinyl that I'll link in my description. I think I purchased this from the Vinyl Cottage or maybe the Vinyl People, but I'll definitely have it. I'll find it for y'all, I'll link it. And I've used white for this. I've overlapped or overlaid. You can use like a nice coral or like a nice pink, whichever color you like. I just had this like sandy color on hand. And so I decided to use that, and I thought it looked really nice behind that Sundae's color. So this decal, all I did was weed it. I'm cutting it. I'm adding my transfer tape, and I am using, I think this vinyl is like permanent vinyl, but even if it's not permanent, you don't have to use permanent because you're going to seal it with epoxy. So I'm just going to place this on my cup cradle that I'll have linked in my description as well. And I'm placing this on that cherry blossom because I think the cherry blossom, it allows it to pop a little bit more, and it just looks so nice. I love that I found the sandy color because it makes it feel, in my opinion, just like sand. So it makes it look more realistic. And for this one, I decided to add those shells at the bottom, only because my husband said he wanted shells on it, even though it's not his tumbler, but whatever. He liked the shells on the bottom, so I thought I'd add the shells. And I just added those shells, excuse me, I just added those shells on that rose gold area, or the golden rose, and they actually looked really cute on the golden rose. I almost added silhouettes of like seagulls in white vinyl at top, but I don't know, I just thought the shells was just enough and it came together. But you guys add as much decals or as little decals as y'all like. This is your tumbler, and I know whatever you create, you're going to create something beautiful. And when I'm finished with applying all of these decals to the tumbler, I'm going to go in with my quick coat from CC DIY. This is a urethane sealer, and I add this to every single tumbler once I place vinyl pieces on tumblers. This allows your vinyl to stick to your tumbler and you won't have any lifting from your vinyl once you go to epoxy. So you need a very little bit amount, you need I'm so tired. You need a little bit amount of this quick coat to add to your decals, and you'll see I'm adding like not even a dime size, and I add way too much anyways because I'm heavy-handed. You let that dry for about 25 minutes and then you move on to epoxying your tumblers, and those decals aren't going anywhere. So I'm going to add 2 thin coats of epoxy to this tumbler. Again, I'm doing bulk epoxy, so I have a lot more epoxy in this cup than what I'm adding to the tumbler. So I added 2 12 milliliters of epoxy to this tumbler. So let's break that down. So this coat of epoxy is 12 mLs of epoxy total. I let that spin, I let that cure, I sand my tumbler lightly, and then I add another 12 mLs of epoxy. The reason why I do 2 thin coats is because to me, I think it looks a lot better at the end than putting that large flood coat of epoxy on that tumbler. And if your table isn't leveled or something, then it might be a little off or crooked or something. So I like the thinner coats, and with the thinner coats it does look a lot better in my opinion. So 2 final coats. This tumbler is still a little tacky, so this is why I'm just kind of slowly trying to take it off just to show y'all the final result, and I'll show you more at the end. So this is what the tumbler looks like once it's finished. I always clean that rim with the X-Acto knife again, and I always clean the inside and the outside of my tumblers with Dawn dish soap. These tumblers are so fun to make. I absolutely love them, and there's so much possibilities to do with these pink beach tumblers. Add whichever decals or whichever paint colors you like on these tumblers and just really have fun with it. I think they are going to be a hit this summer. I already have some posted on my website. I will have that linked in my description below. They are for sale and I'm planning on making more. So here are some of them that I already have made. You'll see that I use some with just the white dispersion colors. Again, I like that better than the acrylic paint. And you'll see that the second one to the left, that one is more orangey because I make that own color paint. So really just have fun with them and add your decals. Some have the seashells on them. I'm going to add some seagulls on other ones. I really just love this saying. It's just, I love it for this pink tumbler. You can always overlap your vinyl. Do you? You're gonna make something great. It's gonna look beautiful. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.